Hello. Today I'm going to walk you through the basic elements and principles of design. And so it's important to consider when developing any design that you should approach a project by developing a concept that will be sort of like carried throughout the design process. A concept is sort of like a well-developed thought or sort of like primary idea on which your message will be based. The word format refers to the surface or the substrate on which the design elements are placed. It's how you want your viewer to see your message, whether it's two-dimensional or three-dimensional or four-dimensional. But no matter what its format or concept, every design will consist of one or more of the following basic elements of design. And those are line, shape, texture, space, size, and value. The goal should always be for you to organize these basic elements into dynamic relationships that are not only visually effective, but also understandable to your target audience. What I would like to do next is to illustrate for you some of these basic elements of graphic design. So here we go. Uh, the first element of design is, of course, the line. And I'd like to just kind of illustrate a few examples for you. So a line is sort of like an element of length, and as a sort of like a mark or a sort of like connecting point of any 2 points. So for example, if I was to begin here and here, it denotes a length within this illustration. And then, of course, a line continues and then begins to be a closed path, which then kind of just develops a very kind of basic rectangular shape. So lines can sort of like organize, direct, or separate, and also kind of suggest or be expressive. And sort of like emotional and suggestive. And also line creates rhythm as well. So I'll kind of quickly show you an example of that. So let's say, for example, that we have a basic composition that I've defined by this kind of simple rectangular shape here, and then as I begin to develop lines down the page, what's happening is it's also kind of creating direction, and it's also repeating and also changing in size and scale. So it's kind of creating a certain flow or rhythm, sort of like throughout the composition. So I think it's important to understand that when you read any composition, we always read from left to right, and from top to the bottom of the page or the composition. Our eyes tend to read any type of communication or information from left to right and from top to bottom, as opposed to perhaps a different culture where in the Eastern culture, for example, you read again, from top to bottom, but from right to left. So I think it's important to understand the way that we also read information. So then the idea with line is that you can sort of like join elements or kind of divide them, kind of using a rule. So for example, if we have a basic shape here and a basic shape here, we can kind of physically, by adding a line here, what we do is we're sort of like dividing or kind of creating a kind of a separation, or sort of like a barrier between these two elements on the left and the right hand side of the page, and so which a line kind of separates the one element in design from the other. The second element of design that I would like to illustrate for you is shape. Now, shape refers to the sort of like external outline of a form, and so anything that has sort of like height and width. And an example would be sort of like the three basic shapes that we know very well. For example, a circle and a square, as well as a triangle. So these are three very kind of familiar shapes, but also they're created with line, and then is referred to as shape. So these would be kind of the shape. The idea of shape is to kind of consider sort of like the fundamental shapes that are found in all aspects of graphic design. And so some of the Swiss graphic designers from the 1950s and 1960s used kind of basic shapes as a very way to kind of reduce a form in design, and I'll sort of like give you an example of that. One such designer is Siegfried Odermatt, and he is a practicing Swiss graphic designer, and he would create posters for cultural events such as music posters, and he would use very basic elements, oftentimes a circle or a square or even a triangle, and he would add typography as sort of like a basic element of design throughout the poster. So here you can see I'm only adding little squiggle marks, if you will. This actually kind of just quickly denotes typography, and he would kind of create these very basic beautiful posters for musical events. So again, the element of line as one basic element of design, as well as shape, in this case it's a circle, is an important factor when and again found in all aspects of graphic design or design in general. The next basic element of design is, of course, texture. And texture is the look and feel of any surface. In two-dimensional form, texture is essentially visual and adds sort of like richness and dimension to work. Texture can also refer to pattern, and which is kind of considered a visual texture. So, for example, if I was to just take this very basic form of what appears to be sort of like a plus sign in arithmetic, or even a cross shape, and I'm to repeat that on this board, this is not only repetition of one form, but also begins to start to create a pattern. And again, the pattern is also referred to as texture. So texture is oftentimes can be physical, and it can be also sort of like virtual as well. So the next basic element of design that I would like to talk about, discuss, is space. Now, space refers to the distance between shapes and forms, but it's best understood in design as sort of like white space or negative space. It's a term that we use to sort of like refer to empty space, but often it's sort of like the active areas that are void of visual elements. Oftentimes we refer to this type of element of design as not only positive and negative, but also we refer to it as figure ground, as sort of like the figure ground relationship, where there's a strong definition of space between the negative space and the positive space. For example, perhaps I could show you even just, if I could move the board for a moment, if you look at the poster, the Simpatico poster that I have right here up on the wall. This is a poster that was designed by the designer, a New York City-based designer, Paula Scher. And she designed this for the Public Theater in Manhattan, and for an advertising campaign of music and also plays that are performed during the summertime in New York City. And this is a play that it was written by Sam Shepard, and there's various famous actors playing in the role in the play. But if you look very closely at the poster, you can see that there's essentially about three colors that exist within this poster. There's white and black, and also if you look very carefully, you can see that there's red, the color red. That's within some of the typography that sort of like stair steps its way down through diagonally through the poster, as you can kind of see running down diagonally. So, but if you look and pay very careful attention to the white and the black space, you know, the essentially the typography, you know, that's kind of stacked on the poster, the Simpatico, sort of like a structure, almost like an architectural structure. You can see that there's a really strong, as I had mentioned, relationship or figure ground relationship, where there's a very strong contrast between the white space and the black space being the typography, and the white space being the ground or the background of the poster. So there's this really dynamic relationship between both the white space and the black space that adds a really strong dynamic element that's sort of like operating within the poster. So I'd like to just kind of move on here. The next element of design that I would like to discuss is size. And size is defined by how big or how small something is in scale to other objects on the page or within the composition. Scale refers to the process of making size relationships. Unless there is a scale of reference within design, it is kind of impossible to sort of like discern the relative size of objects and the meaning that they represent. So I will just kind of diagram for you that relationship. So again, I'm just sort of like creating a format or a space in which is defined as the composition, and I'm just going to kind of draw a very basic shape here. This is the symbol of the Japanese yen, and so you can see that I obviously drew it at a specific size on the page, and then I'm going to repeat that at a different size. So that kind of creates that sort of like dynamic kind of relationship. And then I'm going to repeat that shape again, just a little bit larger. And then this time, I'm going to have it almost kind of cut off the page. And then here, the left side, cutting off the page. So the only thing that we can see, if we were to crop this mark, would be the left diagonal and the two cross marks. So you can begin to kind of see that scale or size is a really important element in design to kind of create these sort of like dynamic relationships within the composition. Okay, so we've talked about line and texture, and we've talked a little bit about space and size, and then now the next element of design is value, and value is sort of like the relative lightness or darkness of an area or of an object. So kind of value is an element that sort of like adds dimension by kind of creating the illusion of depth in design. So with the addition of color, you can create and convey a mood to sort of like enhance a strong concept. So it might be a little bit difficult for me to do this here with just the flat magic marker, but I can again try at least, and I'm just going to kind of quickly create that shape again, the Japanese yen. This time I'm just sort of like going to outline it. And then I'm going to repeat that again here. And then I will also repeat it one more time here. Quickly for you. Okay. So you can see that these three symbols, not quite exactly the same size, but for the most part they are. So there's really not a shift in size or scale so much. And then they're all about the same size, and they've all obviously been drawn with a line. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and kind of quickly fill in this symbol with my magic marker. So you can see by my kind of scribbling, it's kind of creating a sort of like a form of texture, right? It's not solid because I'm not only kind of doing this quickly, but also um, I'm just sort of like illustrating this. So if I just maybe space this out a little bit, in this is actually, I'm sort of like denoting this value by just kind of creating lines. So obviously you can begin to start to see sort of like a shift in one being kind of stronger than the other. And then, as I had mentioned, this is by sort of like increasing the lightness and the darkness of any area or object, it begins to sort of like add dimension by sort of like creating this illusion as though it's sort of like coming back and forth in space. And essentially, I'll just leave that one alone. I don't need to add any texture, and you can begin to see that the three of them, while they're all the same size, some are pushing forward and some feel like they're kind of pushing back, and value is the element of design that enables you to do that. So once the concept is sort of like formally realized, it will need to be applied. And so the principles of design, which we'll discuss in the next lesson, balance, emphasis, rhythm, unity, and contrast, define sort of like the structural foundation of design and determine how the various design elements are kind of organized within a compositional space. And that'll be our next lesson. Thank you.